it may or may not be 4:20 in the morning. Let me turn on some lights in here. Not much going on in here except, of course, for the Ab Lounge, a chair, a mysterious chair that we still haven't been able to figure out the origins of. Well, there it sits. And then after turning on those lights, I just sit down here in front of the big umbrella. For those who don't know what the purpose of an umbrella is, it's to have soft light. Normal lights, if you were to just get a bulb. Okay, hold on. I decided to re-record my explanation of what umbrellas are for. So now it's the next night, and it may or may not be 3:30 in the morning, and I may or may not be wearing protection from this moth that's been flying around in here smacking into everything. So, essentially what an umbrella is for is taking a tiny light source like a bulb and turning it into a huge light source so that you can have really soft shadows as opposed to hard shadows with really hard edges. I'll overlay some pictures over the video so you can see some examples. So for instance, if you look at this bulb here, if there were no umbrella here, you'd have all this light just coming from this tiny point here, and that makes for hard shadows. So you'll notice that newer, virtually all movies and TV shows, at least the higher end ones, are shot, at least in America, with soft lighting, whereas you'll notice a lot of older movies and older TV shows use hard lighting, hard shadows. I'm not sure if most people refer to it as hard lighting or hard shadows. I just call it whatever. So I'm not going to give you a lighting university right now, but that's today's lighting lesson. Stupid moth. Otherwise, hard light looks alright, but in some instances, it can be unflattering. It can make you even look even worse than you actually look, especially if it's like a front flash straight from a camera. I still don't know. Actually, I know exactly why, but just to put this into common language, I still don't know why cameras don't allow you to why the flashes face forward when they could just as easily face upward and then bounce off the ceiling or face to the sides and bounce off the walls. It would cost camera manufacturers probably 5 cents to put a little screw that makes the bulb tilt up or tilt to the sides. But of course, why would they do that when they can charge $200 for a flash that rotates to the sides and looks up and down? Actually, it'd be cheaper, maybe $60, $70 for one that just does the rotation, and then $200 for the ones that I buy that also have a special lighting system that helps the camera read the scene so that every shot comes out with perfect lighting. Anyway, now that you've had today's lighting lesson, let's see what has been going on recently. Oh yeah, of course, a week or two ago, Steve Jobs died, and I may or may not insert a clip I got the other night at this point in the video showing the Apple section at Fry's, my local massive electronics store. And regarding my brain, and which you saw in the last video, I have some fantastic news. And at the same time, I was completely bummed about Anyway, it turns out that instead of having an actual brain injury, I had the most bizarre, difficult to read, strange case of eye strain that you could ever hear about. I didn't even get the idea of eye strain until what I was going to do was I was about to dump $3,000 into going to this brain center and having my brain looked at under some kinds of machines and sensors and whatever to see if they could see what was going on. But it was going to take about 2 weeks just to get in there. So I thought, well, in the meantime, I need to figure out what I need to do. I need to know if any neurologists have advice about what would they recommend that I do in order to make sure that my brain, in the meantime, can recover at the fastest rate possible. And I also want to know how much could it recover. So I posted on some website that lets you specifically ask neurologists for a price, and a good price under like $100. I'm not sure how many people out there think that's a good price, but for me that was better than $3,000. Well, I was going to do both, but anyway, so I asked there, and I laid out all my factors and reasons, and I would have thought I made a really good argument for how it absolutely positively had to have been something like what I thought it was. But the neurologist looked at it and he just said fairly simply, "I think you have eye strain." And at first I was just like, "Oh boy, here we go again." Anybody who has experience with modern medicine and doctors for anything other than a sore throat knows that oftentimes you get answers like that, especially if you have things that aren't really understood very well, like especially the big one nowadays, I think, is chronic fatigue. It seems everybody nowadays has chronic fatigue, and nobody knows how to treat chronic fatigue. Doctors don't even know what to say about it, really. And so people are frequently disappointed whether I'm not exactly sure whether or not they should be disappointed, because people often go to alternative medicine for the solutions, and yet several years after they start using alternative medicine, you, at least in my case, always notice that they still have chronic fatigue and still have pretty much everything that they started out with. So I'm not exactly sure how fair it is to be critical of the fact that doctors sometimes don't seem to be able to say anything about these advanced issues that are hard for them to figure out. So let's see. So the doctor said that he thought I had eye strain, and at first I thought, but how could it be? I've never in not in the last 10 years at least have I ever had any kind of eye strain. I've done 24-hour gaming marathons. I've basically lived on the computer for the last 10 years, and I've never felt anything. But to make a long story short, I did all kinds of little tests. Not all kinds, maybe 2 or 3 little tests to see if I could figure out, by reading things at different distances and trying out. I guess the first thing I did was I just pulled out my iPod and I was just like trying to look at everything really close and then far and trying to see, does that trigger that feeling in my head. And then so anyway, to make a long story short, I was able to figure out, yes, indeed, it was the absolute most ridiculous, hard to read, impossible case of eye strain I've ever heard about or imagined or could imagine ever happening. And there was a good half of the story that I completely forgot and just left out. Okay, so here's where things get really good. In the last video, I said I was about 75% back to normal, but shortly after that, the pain was really bouncing back, and I guess because of my eye activities from that day or something, and the days following, it was really bouncing back, and it was getting really difficult. I thought I couldn't. Anyway, it was escalating again to the point where I realized it's not getting better; it's getting a lot worse, and it doesn't seem to be healing. It seems to be going the other way, and so I was pretty certain that it appeared my brain was on its way to doom. It was about things seemed like they were about to end, and for several days, maybe I can't remember, 4 or 5 days, I felt like it literally felt like going blind. If you could imagine what that would feel like, knowing that you were about to lose your eyesight, except a lot worse, because not only would it have been like going blind, I would have lost everything that I wanted to do in the future. It would have been difficult to talk to people. I wouldn't have been able to read stuff. I wouldn't have been able to follow information. You know, people wouldn't. I wouldn't. It seemed that. It seemed that. If you could describe my brain as a piece of paper, and you can describe the damage that seemed like was happening to it as being a fire that was slowly burning it from one side to the other, it seemed like, okay, so for the rest of my life, I have this much white paper left, and every time I make even a little mistake and cause the burn to grow, it's just going to grow and grow and grow, and pretty soon, you know, you can't go the next 70 years never making one mistake where you have too much input in a day and burn up the rest of the paper, and then that'll be the end, and I won't be able to do anything. So for 4 or 5 days, I was pretty certain that that's what was happening. And by the way, this was not. I've come to the conclusion that it wasn't just eye strain. It must have been like a muscle injury, like when you pull your hamstring or something in your, when you exercise, once you pull your hamstring in your leg. I must have worked my eye muscle so hard on the night that it first started that it must have like just made the muscles say I give up. Anyway, so realizing what it was after that literally felt like getting my life back. And during the days that it happened, I was forced to try to imagine how Steve Jobs must have felt when they told him that his pancreatic cancer was a rare type that was survivable. And then, of course, I thought about all the people around the world who are diagnosed with things every day, and feeling particularly good for the ones who get a second lease on life. And then there's the strange question about alternative medicine. Alternative medicine has played a huge role in my life and the life of my family. And 6-7 years ago, maybe even 4 or 5 years ago, as much as I would have vouched for it back then, like I said before, what I notice nowadays is a strange trend that it seems that every single person we know who has ever used alternative medicine as a means to fix anything has not been cured of anything that I can think of that I know. And so there isn't that much I can say on this subject without I don't know that much on the subject for myself, so there's not much I should say, but that's at least an observation to think about. So, so I'm back. And I've known this for, let's see, about at least a week now. So I've been doing my stuff again. Today, you should have seen me today on Google News. I was just like, sucking it down hard. Don't go anywhere with that phrase. And so I've been, let's see, today I was working on article stuff, Photoshop, planning, Google News. Anyway, so right now life is really good. Really, really good. I feel like I've come back to life, like I've gotten a second lease. So, if there isn't anything I'm forgetting, oh, let's see. There was one tiny bit of information that I wanted to remember to point out was in the days when the eye strain first started, there was this special series of this ironic series of events that happened just then to kind of cause the issue to come about. It was the first time I had brightened my monitors, so my screens were significantly brighter than they had ever been in the last 10 years or so. So that was one. Number two, the lights in the back of my room had all burnt out, and so for the first time in some years, I was using my computer in the dark. I usually make it a good point to make sure I never am using this computer in the dark. So there's always light in my room, aside from the monitors themselves, of course. So I was using the computers in the dark a lot more, and they were brighter, and so that helped. That didn't help. That didn't help a huge deal, and yeah. So that's what I was going to point out. That was just part of the equation, because one of the things that made it difficult to believe at first that it even could be eye strain was because I was thinking about what has changed, and then I realized, aha, a few things have changed. I noticed them at first, but still, if you were to look at the list of other factors going against it being eye strain, it's a pretty long list. That's why I say that's why I say the situation was so crazy and so difficult to read. Anyway, so sometimes information in the world simply flows that way, and things that you thought you were really, really, really certain about can turn out to be the other way. On one hand, it's unfortunate, but I guess if you know how to pay attention enough, then you can avoid most of the pitfalls. Still, you can never avoid all of them, unfortunately. So, with that, I will be, let's see, hold on, before I hit the stop record button, I have to make sure I'm not thinking anything, because I had some stuff that I wanted to remember to cover. Nope, I think that's everything. So I shall be hitting the stop record button.